All right, so we're on the next episode of Blood Money here. I have Noah Malgeri, who is running for Congressional District number 3, correct?
That's right.
Awesome. Noah, nice to have you here.
Thanks, Vem. It's great to be with you here.
Thank you, thank you. So every episode we begin with the key question, what does blood money mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, it means a few different things. I think one meaning that's particularly relevant for the political climate we're living through right now is when office holders, politicians trade policy work and deliver policy objectives in exchange for money from special interest groups or any group that offers to fund a politician to pursue, advance in a policy position and then obtain it that is not a policy which is not in alignment with the interests of the politician's constituents, normally the American people, families, and businesses, and trades that allegiance, that politician trades that allegiance, that obligatory allegiance to the electorate, to their constituents, instead trades out for basically prostituting themselves for money to a special interest group in exchange for personal enrichment. So we see that so frequently now. We see it both with politicians, them, and we see it with the media. And both of this is at epidemic proportion now. I mean, if you look at what the interests of the American people are, American families, American business, what I call regular American citizens, many of the most prominent, well-funded, highest profile politicians, and even one of the parties, I would say, at this point have been completely sold out to interests that are at odds and not in alignment with the interests of that group of people, America. We see it. I mean, you look at, and I've even said this many times. The Democrat Party itself at this point is really no longer a traditional political party. It's not a political party that represents the interests of constituents and the electorate. Instead, it's really like a policy organization for hire to the highest bidder. They don't have constituents. They have clients. Mm-hmm. So the Democrat Party now, it has clients like the Chinese Communist Party, Big Pharma, Big Tech, Wall Street, media, moneyed interests, which constitute the 1% and the elite, but mostly corporate interests, a very small percentage of people, and those are their clients. And so what blood money looks like for a politician, an individual politician, is if I'm a blood money politician, I'll go out and I'll look for my first goal, my modus operandi, my business model as a blood money politician is to say, how can I get rich for myself and my family, increase our security, power, prestige, influence, affluence, and prosperity for as long as I can. And then they find interests that are willing to give them money, give them that power, give them that prestige, that influence, in exchange for their value add, their work, their deliverable, which is to pursue policy objectives that advance the interests of those moneyed interests. And then what they do is they say, in order to put a good facade on it and some plausible deniability to their nefarious corruption, as they say, let's look for some existing policy position that's out there in the political marketplace that incidentally aligns with this objective, and we'll adopt it as our own. Mm-hmm. And then we'll pretend to be a champion of this for legitimate, authentic, sincere reasons, but it's actually just secondary and incidental. So their primary objective is not to pursue any particular interest of any constituent or electorate who's a voter, but instead it's for these money interests, and then they dress it up. So whether it's COVID, whether it's World War III, you look at all the folks on television, the media, politicians. Does anybody believe that it's in the interest of the American people, American national security, American prosperity, American, security to get into World War III? Is that in the interest of the American people in any way, shape, or form? The answer, if you polled people and you put a finer point on it and you ask some other questions, follow-up questions, resoundingly and overwhelmingly would be absolutely not. We don't need to. We're in a terrible situation economically, because of COVID and destructive policies of the Biden regime. we can't afford, we have no money. First of all, there's zero money. We're massively in debt. So we don't have money to fund a war. And also, it's going to result in a lot of death, displacement of populations. It's going to result in starvation, illness, and all the things that war always necessarily, inevitably entails, many of which I've witnessed firsthand as the only veteran in this race. And so I've seen what war can bring, the devastation. We do not want war. But you look at TV, you watch TV, and you would think that the overwhelming consensus among the American people is that we ought to go to war with a nuclear-armed Russia, which is a terrible, preposterous idea. But why are these people selling this? Why are the politicians selling it? No-fly zone, which is a euphemism, which just means go to war with Russia. Why is the media selling it? Why are the media badgering politicians that come on TV and say, why haven't you declared war on Russia? It's a moral panic. It's a moral outrage. You have a moral obligation. Are you an evil monster? You must go to war with Russia and completely devastate the country of Ukraine and potentially much of the rest of the world because it's a moral imperative. Why do they do that? Because they're getting rich off it. The interests that support them want to have a mouthpiece, several mouthpieces to push this agenda because they stand to make millions and billions and trillions of dollars off of war with Russia. Not because it serves the interests of the American people. So you have these prostitutes in the media and in politics, and that's blood money, whether it's COVID. Same thing with COVID. Everybody must get vaccinated. Children, babies, 5-year-olds, infants, experimental gene therapy, no long-term studies. Pregnant women must get vaccinated. We will not permit any questions. If you question it, you hate grandma. You're a killer, you're evil, you're a murderer. Moral outrage, bullying, intimidation. No one's allowed to think. Don't pause and think. Does World War III serve the interests of the Ukrainian people? Does it serve the American people? Are we allowed to ask questions? No, you're not allowed to ask questions. You must do it. This is blood money. Pharma industry, trillions of dollars, right? Off this vaccine. We have no idea what the long-term consequences are. We're going to find out one way or the other. We got guys in the FDA saying, well, the only way to find out what the effects of this vaccine, this quote-unquote, fake vaccine are in children is to start mass inoculating or jabbing these babies, and we'll just see if they die or not. That's the only way to find out. This is blood money, all blood money. And that's a state. We got the complete corruption, pervasive, comprehensive dysfunction and corruption of the elite political class and the media class in alignment because they're getting paid by the same interests. So it's so dangerous because they're aligned. The media plays cover. The corrupt media, blood money media, plays cover for the corrupt blood money politicians, and they play off each other. They plant stories, they cover for each other, and they try to play the American people. We were set up with COVID, and we're getting set up for World War III.
Wow. People potentially dying from COVID, this being the asbestos of this generation, and now World War III.
Let me tell you how they do this, Vem. This is the way they do it. So you got the truly craven, black-hearted, corrupt part of it, which folks are, and these are the primary first movers are the folks who are paying it. But the prostitutes, among the prostitutes in the media and the political class, you got the people who are just dark-hearted, dead soul people, like the Biden crime family, for example, willing to literally do anything. I mean, the Biden crime family is a perfect example of blood money politician, right? You got Hunter Biden running around as a bagman internationally, selling, prospective policy through the Obama administration as a consequence of his father's occupation of the vice president office in Ukraine and China, interestingly, the two biggest countries now that we're involved in, and getting rich off it, okay? Again, these are folks who look for opportunities to make money and then try to find a policy platform that exists in the political marketplace that incidentally aligns with that, and then they adopt it to provide cover. Or they invent one. But I'll tell you a little bit about how they do it in a second, but I just wanted to follow up on my point about the Democrat Party. Now, modern Democrat Party, as I said, is not a political party. We need to stop calling it a political party. It's not a political party. It's just a policy machine for hire to the highest bidder, like a lobbying firm or a law firm, but it's a corrupt one. And so they don't have constituents, they have clients, And they work, everything that they do is to advance the interests of the Chinese Communist Party, Wall Street, big tech, big pharma, media are one of their clients. Okay? And what they do is exactly what I said. Then they find special interest groups to put a face and a window dressing on this corruption. So they look, we're gonna pretend and market ourselves and brand ourselves as the champion of the oppressed. Okay? So we're going to find some ostensibly oppressed groups of people, or we're going to create them. We're going to teach people that they are oppressed who didn't formerly know it, to create a constituent.
Good way to put it.
Yeah, to create a fake constituent class that they can use to get on television and pretend that they actually have a legitimate objective and a purpose in life. So it's these small fringe groups. The problem is these small fringe groups, whatever they may be, they don't do anything for them, and that's becoming obvious. But number two, they don't constitute enough people to win elections, which leaves them in a kind of a conundrum, and it has an opportunity to tank their business model, because you have to win elections at the end of the day, or then you're of no value to your funders. So how do you do that? Well, you cheat. So they cheat on elections. But how does this work, Vem? This is how it works. You got the craven ones, the black-hearted people like the Biden crime family, okay? They say we're going to get billions of dollars rich. All we have to do is sell out to, funding bio labs in Ukraine or whatever the case may be. Then they convince they can't do it alone, right? Just not enough people. So they got to convince others to go along with them. So they can't pay everybody, and they don't want to pay everybody because that's going to dilute their enrichment. But what they do is they take other people and say, look, it's obvious we're going to be lying to the American people. But look, you have to understand, the thing that we're pursuing here is so important that any means necessary to achieve this end is justified. Okay, or so they'll take people like.
So it becomes like almost like morally people feel obligated.
Yes, and all the techniques they use are textbook intelligence techniques that the CIA teaches for how to overthrow regimes and conduct coups and all this stuff. They use it against the American people. First, you demonize your opponent. Your opponent is subhuman, so it doesn't matter. And they're so destructive and dangerous that it's like assassinating Hitler. Do you think the folks who tried to do an assassination attempt at Hitler were following the law of the Third Reich? No, they were breaking the law. But it didn't matter. They were going to blow up Hitler, right? So that's the thinking, the mindset that they create with trying to get Trump out by any means. Or, look, we got this pandemic. It's going to wipe out, 4 or 5 million people in the United States, potentially more. We can say anything we want because this vaccine is going to save the world, man. It's going to save the world. So we got to get a shot in every arm, every baby, every pregnant woman, every child. Doesn't matter what the cost is, because if we don't get a shot in everybody's arm, civilization is over. So we can lie to people. So that's what they get for the second. That's what they do to the second tier people to get them involved and get them on board. Then there's a third tier as well, which is to fill in some of the gaps that they can't fill through direct payment or the moral outrage, because not everyone's susceptible to the moral outrage. What they can do is they compromise people, and so that's why you see, they either compromise people or use compromised or marginal people. So what they'll do is they'll take a guy of limited talent, okay, limited capacity to do anything.
You're talking about politicians?
Politicians. So they'll go to a prospective politician who's a low-level politician but has aspirations and visions of grandeur. But it just really doesn't have what it takes to bring to the table to get there on his own. They'll say, look, hey, how would you like to be a United States Senator? I mean, you're serving in the assembly here in this state, but how would you like to be a senator? Wouldn't that be great? We'll get you there. We'll take care of it. It'll happen, but we own you. And we owe everything you are and everything you have in that position, you'll owe to us.
Could I give an example here, by the way? Tony Blair, if you go back in his history, it's known that he was once caught jerking off in a public bathroom. And I always thought to myself, and they buried that, by the way, like they actually, it's hard to find the records, but people know it happened. It's still out there. And I always thought to myself, they took this guy and they said, look, we're going to make you a big politician. We're going to cover up that you basically are masturbating and are a sex offender, know, and look what happened to him. There are other examples.
Oh, there's hundreds. John Kerry's a great example on the American side. So they take these people who either have marginal capability and marginal capacity or competence, and they elevate them. Or they'll take somebody like you said, Tony Blair, who's fundamentally compromised. Somebody who might be really smart but has a problem, real problem, who's fundamentally compromised. They'll say, look, this is going to be a problem for you. You're really smart. It's such a shame, if this weren't. but we'll take care of it for you. Yeah. And so they'll take, or they'll take other people and flip them. They'll take somebody who's good and fairly doesn't have either of those infirmities, and they'll create that infirmity. So they'll entrap them in a situation. So you get these three tiers. You get the money takers, you got the true believer, moral outrage people, and then you got the compromised people. This is how the machine works, okay? And so that's blood money. But everything is blood money now because the political class, we don't have freedom, Vem, in our country, okay? Yeah. It's an illusion because we don't have the ability to elect our own representatives and leaders in free and fair elections, right? We don't have that. We know that's gone. We don't have the ability to speak our mind because we have censorship, right? And we have deplatforming and cancel culture. We don't have the ability to make our own medical decisions. We're not permitted to. You could lose your job, your reputation, your family. They take kids away from their parents if they won't vaccinate them. The courts will do it. And we don't have the ability to exercise our parental rights because the schools say that the teachers union owns your kids. You don't have the right to know if your 12-year-old daughter wants to transition gender. You don't have that right, parent. You don't have the right to know if your 14-year-old daughter is going to get an abortion and we're going to bring your daughter there. You don't have the right to know if your 11-year-old son or your 15-year-old son wants to get a COVID shot and we induce them to get a COVID shot and we're going to take them to get COVID. You don't have a right to know that stuff. And if we don't have any of those fundamental liberties anymore. Are we really free? No. The answer is no. We're not. We don't live free.
Yeah, we're not. No. It's sad. It's sad.
Well, the scary thing too, there's a couple of frightening, terrifying things about this that really, really concern me. One is that the fact is this is not isolated to the United States, right? So the fact is we see this happening in a coordinated fashion all over the world in a certain type of country, formerly free, liberal democracies, Western nations, Western civilization, that had ostensibly had self-determination, some type of democracy or representative, republic. So it's Australia, Canada, Western Europe, and the United States. Why are those the countries being most heavily targeted? Because we're in globally a movement now. We're in the midst of it. My contention is we're already in World War III, and it's not the beginning of the end of World War III. This is not even the end of the beginning of World War III. But we're in World War III. But there's a movement to move away from a form of societal organization, which is organized around the principle of self-determination and individual liberties and freedom, which serves as an obstacle to what the people who control things see as the next phase of human existence and evolution, which is to be this more neo-Marxist techno-fascism, medical fascism, but it really is about centralized control and Marxism, and it's about authoritarianism. And another aspect and a characteristic of this new society that we're moving into globally is that in the post-World War II order and prior to that, the most powerful entities in the world were the nation states. The nation states could control, create laws and rules for how corporations operating within their borders would behave, right? And conduct themselves. Now, the nation states are of merely residual importance. Okay, the corporations themselves now run the nation states. So now we're in an existence where the most powerful entities are no longer ostensibly representational organizations to serve for the benefit of their citizens, but rather commercial organizations whose only obligation is to maximize profits. Now, those are the most powerful entities, and they retain the nation state and the illusion of freedom, as we've talked about, because that's useful because they want to use the administrative and regulatory capacity of the nation states as a means to help implement their big picture policy objectives. So now the corporations, Pfizer and all these corporations run the world now. Okay, it's not the United States. It works for Pfizer.
BlackRock.
BlackRock's these massive investment organizations that can set rules for corporate governance and ESG and
control the media, control the message at the same time.
Control the media, control the message, refuse to invest, pull money out, and control. So they can implement control, but the corporate interests, which are commercial interests, they're not nonprofit organizations, they're for-profit organizations, are just looking to maximize their consumer base. And that's going to be through control. It's going to be through regulation. It's going to be through authoritarianism. And the scary thing is we live in a world now really of turnkey authoritarianism, but it hasn't been fully turned on. The key is in the ignition, and it's starting to turn. It's on accessory now, so you can turn on the radio, and you can turn on the headlights, but the engine's not running. Okay, but the key's in there, and what I mean by that is all the apparatus and infrastructure for complete 100% totalitarianism exists right now. It just hasn't been turned on for nefarious purposes yet. So every spending decision you make, every deposit, withdrawal, purchase that you make, everything you say, not just online. My phone's listening to me right now, right? It's listening to me right now, and there's gonna be ads that come up later that correspond to the conversation that we had. Everything I say online, in private, every telephone call, every text message, every email, every travel decision, every decision I make for employment, everything I do is susceptible now. It's in a government database, or can be in a government database, and much of it already is, we found illegally. And they have the ability to control. Canada, Justin Trudeau is already freezing assets, freezing bank accounts for people who gave $50 to the truckers movement. You know, it doesn't matter who you are. So we live in turnkey authoritarianism. It hasn't been turned on. So the question is, will we as free people wake up and take the key out of the ignition? Because it's going to get turned. When it's turned on, you'll have no freedom. And so the concept of liberty and freedom then is going to be flipped on its head from what it has been historically, which is in a Western democracy, you could do anything you want except that which is illegal. You can do whatever you want except which is illegal. The concept of liberty is going to be flipped, and it's going to be you can do nothing unless and until you receive affirmative permission from the government. And that permission is going to be granted to you based on, or as a function of, the extent to which you behaved and conducted yourself in conformance with whatever the government says is right or wrong, and good and evil. And also, another aspect of this is historically, our countries and our societies in the West and Western civilization have been organized around the principle of right and wrong, objective virtue and vice, good and evil. But instead, they're flipping it to something that's far more useful, has much more utilitarian value for authoritarians, which is to say, the only dynamic that matters and through which, the lens through which every policy decision must be made, is something that is oppression and victimhood. So it's just pure fundamental 101 Marxism. And there's no good and evil. Good is anything the state tells you to do. Evil is anything the state prohibits. All you care about is oppression and victimhood. And as we said, they could pick victim classes at will that align with their policy objectives incidentally, or they can create one. They can create a victim class, and they've done it many times. They come up with a new one. They'll come up with a new one. You know, trans rights is the civil rights struggle of this century, according to what they've created. Now, is that really true? I mean, do we really believe that? Because how did that just all arise from nothing, right? Now this is allegedly the biggest civil rights battle that exists. Perfect example of them creating an oppressed group and for utilitarian purpose, right? Yeah. This is what they do. So this is the illusion that we live in.
Do you think we're going to get out of this? Or are we going down the road of authoritarianism here?
Yeah, I think we're way down the road of authoritarianism. We're already a day late and a dollar short to this fight. We're already on borrowed time. There's not enough people awake. You know, I said before, there's a couple things that terrify me about this, not so much what they're doing, one of which is that it's happening globally in a coordinated fashion, which is extremely concerning. And number two is that there's just too many of us who are asleep still. Because there's still today, as we speak on this date, at the date of this interview, there's more of us than there are of them, okay? And they can't arrest us all, okay? That means that the narrative control and the psychological operation of this is absolutely critical to them. Because if we were to find out reality and all realize it at once, this whole nonsense would be over in a week, right? Because we'd make sure of that. The problem is they got to keep the narrative control. But, you know, so I think we're headed well down the road of authoritarianism. I think we're late to the fight. I think, you know, I'm playing for time right now. I mean, I think right now we may not achieve total victory. The forces, powers, and resources that are arrayed against us are too well organized, too well planned, too well funded and resourced, and it'll be a challenge. We're going to need a miracle. We're going to need to get on our knees and pray. Now there's always, you know, the intermediate objective, which is to delay and play for time. Because I got kids and I don't want them growing up in this authoritarianism. If we can buy a decade, that's worth it to me. You know, so that's part of this campaign too, is getting people engaged, getting them to wake up, and spreading the truth. You know, one of the characteristics of this whole climate that we're living in is that now, I mean, you know this, man, but value of any commodity is a function of its scarcity, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever it is, diamonds, gold, water, oil, wheat, it's a function of its scarcity. The scarcer it is, the more valuable it is. Right now and you can make things scarce. You can make things scarce and therefore increase their value by making them illegal. Mm-hmm. So we saw, I mean, if you go to a place where cocaine is illegal, it's worth a lot of money, not because it's scarce, fundamentally scarce, but because it's illegal. So mm-hmm. So now we're the commodity that's scarce because it's illegal is truth. Mm-hmm. So now truth is at the highest value it's ever been. If you looked at the investment value of truth, it's mm-hmm. extremely high. It's gone straight up. It's rocketed because they've made it illegal. Truth is contraband. Okay, the government will arrest you and shake you down. You'll get persecuted. You'll lose your reputation, your job, your livelihood, your money, your kids potentially, for the possession and distribution of truth, not some drug. Mm-hmm. So truth is now contraband. That's what we need to fight against. We need to exercise boldly our individual rights. But you talked about the father issue, and it brings up a really good point. So that illustrates so perfectly how the blood money class of politicians using authoritarian means and Marxist means, the oppression, victimhood paradigm, can control it. Because it has nothing to do with reality, right? You might say, well, there's more people who experience oppression as a consequence of policies around fatherhood mm-hmm. than there are trans people who experience oppression as a consequence of whatever civil rights legislation exists or doesn't exist. But it doesn't matter and so you say, well, maybe one group there's more oppression there associated with one than the other, but that doesn't matter because the blood money politicians in concert with the media, I told you, they pick the oppressed and victim mm-hmm. to serve their own interests. So it doesn't serve. They've already designated white men as oppressors mm-hmm. Conclusively. There's no escape from that. Yeah. So consequently, they can't be victims. They can't be oppressed because they're oppressors. Mm-hmm. So. If you're a father, chances are you're a straight man, okay? Mm-hmm. Not always, but chances are you're a straight man. So if that's the case, then you're an oppressor. So we can't really acknowledge any victimhood associated with you because it'll undermine the entire narrative, mm-hmm. okay? So that's how that works. It has nothing to do with reality.
I guess multiple choice. Are we walking into authoritarianism and we're just screwed? Are we looking at revolution or civil war? Are we looking at the government conducting genocide against people that dare to fight back? Or what do you think? What would you say your future prediction is about what's coming over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I will tell you this, from a military perspective, the way you conduct a military operation sometimes is you have a military objective and a kinetic military objective. So you conduct an ambush, okay, mm-hmm. or you're gonna conduct an invasion. So you have a time and a date set for that to go off, right? Mm-hmm. But before that, you got 3 weeks to do it. It's 3 weeks before it happens. You're training, rehearsing, and then you're prepping the battlefield. So what you're doing is you're setting the conditions or creating the conditions or maximizing the conditions for your ultimate success on the day of the launch. Mm-hmm. So that means you're going to go in there and you're going to do whatever you can to make sure that when it happens, it goes off smoothly. But then on the day of the launch, once you hit it, now you're in the main effort. Okay, so now you're in the main effort. Now up until the launch, something could come along and you might postpone the date of the launch. You mm-hmm. might postpone the date of the main effort. You mm-hmm. might say, something happened, it was unforeseen, but now we're going to postpone it. And you might back down, you might back off, and you might change your plan. Because you have the luxury of doing that. But once you're in the main effort, you don't ever double down now. You don't ever back down now. You double down.
You're there,
You're there and you go through. The only way home is through now. Mm-hmm. You have to complete the mission at whatever cost at this point. Okay, you can retreat, but it'll be a massive cost, and it'll be years before you can fight again, maybe potentially, or weeks or months at massive loss. So we're in the main effort right now, and I told you this is being conducted like an information psychological intelligence operation, but mm-hmm. it's global, and we're in the main effort. So what does that mean for us? You asked, what's the outcome? How's this going to end? Well, I don't think they're going to be backing down now. So mm-hmm. my fears are manifold. But as you mentioned, it's in their interest always to create disorder and to create unrest of any kind, because then they can take order out of chaos, but it's their order, right? Mm-hmm. It's their prescribed brand of order. So you have, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, whatever the Hegelian dialectic that you want to choose is. But they foment unrest to use the opportunity to create fear, panic, anxiety, and a desire for safety, to elevate the desire for safety, so people are more willing to trade liberty for security because that's their most urgent and imminent need in the midst of this unrest. And so then they can implement whatever their policy is. And so that's what we see. Now, my fears are with just the fact that we're in World War III, right? We're in World War III now, so we're going to that's why they're trying to foment all this unrest, actual hot war with Russia, but it's already messed up because 25% of the world's wheat supply is supplied by Ukraine plus Russia of the world, and a big portion of that's supplied to Northern Africa and some parts in Southeast Asia. So they're already having food riots in Northern Africa, so the wheat's not getting there.
Wow.
So there's going to be potentially a massive famine in parts of the world, which will create a refugee crisis, which I love. Refugee crisis is their favorite thing in the world because that's automatic victimhood and oppression, and they plug right into that because they can say, look, these people, I mean, what are you gonna do? Hey, look, the Ukrainian people, man, they're suffering, so we gotta prolong the suffering to save them. You know, the Ukrainian people they're suffering. There's a hospital that's bombed. We have to send them more weapons of war so that the bombing will continue longer and longer and longer, so we can continue to send them weapons so the bombing will continue longer and longer and longer, and eventually one stray missile will go into a NATO country and then it's on. It's green light, full World War. You know, so but the same thing with the refugee crisis that's coming, or the supply chain thing with the fuel and energy that they've created intentionally to drive people into feeling powerless, weak, food insecure, money insecure, impoverished, scared, anxiety, and then they can say, hey, here's a, you know, same thing with COVID. Well, everybody's going to die. I mean, the whole country is going to die. I mean, 2 million, 4 million people are going to die. So do what we say, or else you're screwed.
Yeah.
You know, don't think about it. So they always try to foment these things. And so my point is, I don't think they're going to back down. So COVID, again, to me, was a test. Okay, COVID was not the biological offensive that they plan. Okay, but it was probably the last test before the real one. Because COVID is relatively benign, large scale, in real data terms for most people. Now, it had exacted a horrible cost on some and many. But big picture, they created it into a pandemic because when they actually launched something that is a pandemic, they wanted to see how people will respond and react. And what systems that are in place that actually work for them and which ones don't. Which ones need to be fine-tuned and adjusted, refined, and personalities that need to be replaced because they're not going to be useful. So when the real one comes, that they actually launch on us, okay, it's not going to be an upper respiratory, transmissible virus like that causes you to get sick and have the flu. It's going to be something much worse. It's going to be something much more terrifying. It could be some type of hemorrhagic fever, like an Ebola type thing, where you're bleeding out of your eyes and it affects everybody and children. But this was a test, and the test was, clearly it was a genetically engineered virus. They had the vaccine already either ready or in development substantially before the virus came to the United States, and it was all planned out. And we're going to probably see more because they're not going to back down. Wow.
What do you think is really going on with Russia and Ukraine?
Vladimir Putin may or may not be very, very, very in bad shape in health. I think he has, I don't know. I can't know he can confirm this, but he could have some advanced cancer situation. He's not that old. I think he's in his late 60s, but he may be in rough shape. And one of his aspirations had been for a long time to get back Ukraine. This whole thing with Ukraine goes back at least 100 years. 100 years ago, I think it was Lenin starved 4 or 5 million Ukrainians to death in a massive Holocaust. And then Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union for a while. And then after the Soviet Union fell, there were all these nukes that were in Ukraine that belonged to the former Soviet arsenal because of its proximity to Western Europe and the United States. They stationed a lot of them in Ukraine. And then the United States and Russia entered, and the UK and Ukraine entered into this agreement called the Budapest Memorandum, where both Russia and the United States agreed never to invade Ukraine as long as the Ukrainians gave up all the nukes and gave them to Russia, which they did, allegedly. So Putin already broke that and when he invaded Crimea, 8 years ago or whatever, and then he broke it again. So we have a basis to have sanctions against Russia, or to definitely, be displeased with Russia. They broke an agreement with us and with the Ukrainians and with the Brits. But, I think his aspiration had been, we talk about how, so we intentionally pushed the Russians to this position, okay?
By trying to put like NATO bombs on their doorstep, basically.
Yeah,
right?
It's kind of like the Bay of Pigs, with Cuba.
Yeah.
But so the country of Ukraine, you have to understand, is basically like a client state of the international, but to a large degree, the American permanent security state, which is mostly staffed and resourced with people who align with the Democrat Party. So the Ukraine nation is kind of like a client state, not of the United States so much as it is like a client state of the Democrat Party or the permanent intelligence state. And there's Republicans who are a member of the permanent intelligence state as well. And that's why, and it's also one of these nations that quite unfortunately found itself at the crossroads between two civilizations and two powers, Western Europe and NATO and the Soviet and Russia, just like these other nations that are like that, like Afghanistan and others. It ends up being a curse for these countries. But because its strategic value so much that these countries are always waging war.
A lot of push and pull, like from all directions.
Right. But really what the Ukraine has served a lot of purposes for the permanent security state. One is it's been always an opportunity if they ever needed to turn on a war for whatever reason, if things got really, really, really bad. Because the final bailout, life preserver, life vest for the permanent blood money political class, intelligence state, surveillance state, police state, is to start a war. Because that wipes everything clean. People forget about everything else that you've done and failed at, whether it be withdrawal from Afghanistan or COVID response or the border. And so they can always have a bailout. It's like, so they like Ukraine because it's a great opportunity to always turn on a war with Russia.
Yeah.
So we'll just constantly antagonize, Putin or Russia with Ukraine, and we'll continue to try to push to encourage. You see the permanent police state people and security state people always saying, Ukraine's got to join NATO. It's great. Kamala Harris and Lindsey Graham, these people, they want Ukraine, which is one of the most fundamentally corrupt nations in the world, to join NATO, just to antagonize Vladimir Putin and Russia, so they can have the opportunity, if they need to turn on a war if things get really bad, which is what's happening now. Things are really, really bad. Most approval ratings historically, they're all this bad sentiment among the American populace directed against all these people who control it. But Ukraine has always been, and so because it's like their client state for the Democrat Party and the security state, they use it to do all this corruption. I mean, you got all these biolabs there, 20 biolabs there. The Bidens went over there and made how much money through corruption.
Millions.
Rosemont Seneca with Hunter and all that stuff. And it's just a thing where they just use it. They foment coups over there to oppose leaders. They install people and just keep it hot all the time, torturing the poor Ukrainian people through no fault of their own because of these craven blood money politicians. So Vladimir Putin's going to maybe die, and he thinks, well, what's my legacy going to be? I'm done with this. And we're going to, and also he went and secured assurances from President Xi in advance that, through when all the sanctions inevitably came from the West, that Xi would take care of him and hook him up, so they wouldn't really feel the pain of it. And then, to reciprocate from that, later Russia would supply all the energy to China when they inevitably invade Taiwan.
Wow.
So now we've driven Russia and and China together in a nuclear armed bloc against the United States because of the malfeasance and corruption of these blood money politicians and their own personal aspirations that, again, they're in conflict with the interests of the American people and indeed free people and just people everywhere, because it's not about anybody except for themselves. So that's what they've done. Big picture, Russia thinks he's got to get Ukraine back for his legacy. He's going to die, right?
You think he's really going to die, or is that just like, more fake news?
Speculation. We don't know. That could be one explanation for it. The other thing is, as I said, the permanent blood money state needs a war right now really, really bad. I mean, they need it. Like, they desperately need a war to bail them out because things are just really bad for the corrupt class. The corrupt class are really hurting right now. You know, they've made a lot of money on COVID, but the people are getting restless. I mean,
totally.
The people are getting uncomfortable.
There's a lot of anger. I mean, I don't know, just knocking on doors, I'm seeing people that are, I'm seeing really normal people that are, you know, not former military, not extremists, going like, the only thing that's going to clean this up is some kind of a uprising or like civil war. And it's like, I've just never heard that on such a regular basis. Yeah,
we're headed toward the permanent blood money class. The security state has managed to pretty much destroy the country and exhaust whatever vestiges of positive will that they ever enjoyed through propaganda and lies. But now the lies are just absolutely so naked that you really have to be a real true believer. You have to be a real, a fanaticist, a tribal fanaticist to the Democrat Party or whatever it is to continue to buy the nonsense. Because it's just so openly, the State of the Union was just a whole gaslighting session about just pure made up fantasyland lies, just for however long it was. And that's what we see on TV every night as well. And it's really straight up, it's propaganda. I mean, CNN, MSNBC, NBC, all these legacy news organizations that are just corrupt. All they do is they're just literally propaganda organizations. I mean, they've come to the point where there is zero reporting. It's literally everything is propaganda. I mean, it's Pravda times 10. It's beyond. It's beyond it.
Yeah.
So, and you know, people see that. I mean, we're not stupid. So they're in a really precarious situation because they haven't outlawed the guns yet. They haven't confiscated the guns, right? And people are starting to realize the truth, and they don't like paying, $5, soon to be $7, potentially $9, $11 a gallon for gas. They don't like, losing their livelihoods for not getting a shot, and they don't like to be lied to about elections, and they don't like having a mass invasion at our border, and people don't like that. So that's why I also say this is the main effort of the Great Reset, because everything's happening so fast. It tells me one thing, Vem, is that they don't think that they're going to have to answer for their malfeasance, because they don't think there's going to be an opportunity to do so, because that means they think that there's, for example, one aspect of this, I don't know that they believe that there's going to be an election in 2024. I think they're fairly certain, and many of them have been told and they believe that there may not be an election in 2024. That's why they don't care about their tanking approval ratings, because that's why they won't close the border, they won't buy, they won't return on American oil production and hydrocarbon production, despite massive public sentiment for those two things, because where do they get disciplined for failure to follow the will of the people? At the election. They don't think there's going to be an election in 2024. That's what it tells me. That's why I'm scared. They're behaving as if they already know that there's not going to be an election in 2024. It's completely irrational. Again, this is not incompetence, folks. Everybody needs to stop saying, "Oh, the incompetence of poor old Joe Biden." No, this is all intentional. It's all intentional.
Yeah. As you've been talking with people, you don't feel like there's enough people waking up to this, where there's organization on the we the people level towards this malfeasance?
Yeah, there's a couple stages to it. So there's subjective individual awakening going on, but the people have not yet understood that other people feel the same way yet. And so they're being prevented intentionally from making that connection.
Socially distanced in a way.
Socially distanced, but also they're afraid to say it. When I go out and say things like this in public, on the media, on television, in rooms of people, on radio, everybody agrees with me, and they think, "Geez, I didn't know everybody else thought the same thing I think." So there's subjective individual awakening, but they haven't made the connection. That's the next stage. That, geez, this is it's called affirmation and reassurance. And it's called confirmation. That, look, because they're being told on the news all night, if you think these things, you're insane, and you're a traitor, you're disloyal, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're an insurrectionist, you're a domestic terrorist. If you believe these things, certainly if you say them, you're a domestic terrorist. So they haven't made the connection yet. Wait a second, everybody thinks the same thing I do because it's plain as day. And when they think that, this is very particularly dangerous. And that's why I get out there and try to say these things all the time, because I want people to wake up to make the connection that we're all on the same page on this. It's extremely dangerous for the permanent security state when this happens, because what happens when everybody gets together and they realize that they're all thinking the same thing? Well, one is then they can do the next thing that you said, which is organize. But it also, they feel really, really burned, and they're pissed.
Betrayed,
They're betrayed because they were lied to. And now they're pissed. So that's where we're headed. You know, it's a race. Is the deep state, you know, security state, blood money class going to be able to enslave us or oppress us sufficiently so that by the time we do awaken, it's too late? Or are we going to awaken, come together, and organize before that point? That's the relevant race of our time. Because it's global. The same problems that we're facing here are facing Australia, Canada, all over Western Europe. If this happens first and we all awaken, come together in solidarity, and then organize before they're able to implement the sufficient control mechanisms to prevent us to resist, then they're in trouble. But as I said, they won't back down, so it'll probably end up being some type of disgusting civil war.
Bloodshed, yeah. I definitely,
yeah.
I mean, whoever I talk with is, I had another conversation yesterday with a legal historian intellectual that's written books about this stuff and is a former Marine as well. And he's just like, man, it could be like Civil War was like 500,000. This could be like 5 million. He's like, he could not see another solution to this problem because of the same issues that you bring up. Noah, is there anything you want to say about your candidacy and the fierce urgency of getting somebody like you in office that understands what's going on?
It's absolutely 100% critical if we want it, not to elect me, but to elect enough people who know what's going on. Number one, are willing to articulate it in a way that makes sense. Two, in public. Number three, without censorship or reservation. Number four, consistently. Number five, and have plans to address it and are willing to follow through on those. Number six. If we don't address, the whole Republican Democrat thing now is not really useful. I mean, even conservative, liberal is not really useful. The main dynamic that's at work now, flat out, is brass tacks. It's authoritarianism and freedom, and it's propaganda and truth. So you need people. Just pick people who are 100% pro freedom and truth, unashamedly willing to put themselves out there, who have gone through the gauntlet, have been tarred by the media as I have nationally, have already been labeled as one of the most dangerous GOP candidates in the entire country in 2022 by national progressive media. And
that's like a badge of honor at this point, brother.
It is, because I am a dangerous candidate when it comes to the danger that it presents to the rise of authoritarianism.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to get candidates like that. But again, do I have a high degree of confidence that we're going to win this fight? No. As a former military plans officer, someone who practiced law on 3 continents, lived around different places and done things, I don't have a high degree of confidence that we're going to win this. Is it possible? Absolutely. And with God, everything is possible. But the reality is, we can always, even that being said, we can always play for time. And we in time. Remember, their technique right now is rush. Everything rush. War with China. I mean, war with Russia and ultimately China probably. But war with Russia, COVID vaccines. Don't think. Rush. Because they have to implement their control mechanism again before the truth and self-awareness, solidarity, and organization takes hold, because then they're kind of screwed, or it gets a lot messier. So if we can play for time, spread the truth, I think we're in a much better position. I don't know that we're going to prevail.
One other question I want to bring up. There's a lot of people I know that have bought land in the middle of nowhere that are basically building small communes or communities with their own food supplies, with their own water supplies, with their own fruits and vegetables. And essentially, these are popping up all over the place now because people feel like this. One of the reasons this is all happening is because the central banking system, which essentially has a cycle of life to death, is dying, and hence all these nefarious powers are trying to rush us into this new world, whether it's the metaverse, whether it's authoritarianism and more control, because their entire system's falling apart. That's why that's what a lot of these people believe is a reason why we're experiencing a lot of things you just discussed, right? What do you think about that kind of an approach?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. So one of the aspects of the total authoritarianism is financial authoritarianism. Okay, it's already being beta tested in places where they're freezing your financial assets, and that's why all these authoritarians like Fidel Jr. up north. That guy is, he's a real terrible guy. So the current global financial system is actually it's not going through a natural life cycle death. It's actually being killed. So what they're doing, because one of the aspects of the full authoritarianism included, we have medical authoritarianism, information authoritarianism, but you need financial authoritarianism. The problem is cash presents an obstacle to that, right? If I have cash, it's anonymity. So I can do whatever I want. I can give people cash, right? And there's no paper trail. So that's a problem for the authoritarians. That's intolerable for them, okay? So what they need to do is they need to destroy all the sovereign currencies that are associated with cash. They need to destroy anything that has a cash value. So the U.S. dollar has to be destroyed. That's why they just passed another 1 point. Yeah. So they're just trying to destroy the currency. That's why we have runaway inflation now. What's the real number? It's at least 20%. Undoubtedly, we don't know. Ultimately, this leads and by the way, all the inflation that's already been injected structurally hasn't even manifested yet. So there's much more inflation to come. Even if we stop today, there's massive amounts of inflation to come just because structurally the inflation hasn't even manifested. But it's going to end up destroying the currency, which is by design, and it's happening all over the world. Other central banks around the world, in order for them to replace it with a digital currency. Digital currency is great because then you can give people timeouts for bad behavior. You can freeze their assets, your spending power. You can give them an allowance. You said something bad, Noah, on social media. You're talking about the stolen election. We know that's not true. So you're going to be limited to $1,000 per month for 4 months until you reform your behavior. They can do any of that, and they'll do it. 100% guaranteed they're going to do it. So they're crashing the sovereign currency systems around the world, the American Reserve currency status. They're trying to suppress all cryptocurrencies that are organic, but they will have a cryptocurrency, but it'll be sovereign cryptocurrencies from China, the one on the yuan and the one here in the United States that they're developing. And that'll be the one you're required to use, and they'll have 100% control over it. You don't get your COVID shot, doesn't mean you're not going to be able to go to Chipotle and get a burrito. It means you're not going to be able to pay your bills. You're not going to be able to pay your heating bills. You're not going to be able, until you get that shot, you're not going to be able to pay your bills because it'll be frozen. Your cryptocurrency will be disabled. It will be non-functional. It'll be suspended. You'll be in timeout because you're a bad subject. You're not a citizen anymore. Now at this point, you're a slave. You're a slave. So that's where we're headed.
Yeah, and the way to combat that: grow your own stuff. Grow your own stuff. Have your own water supplies. Have your own land. At least have it on the side. It doesn't cost that much money to get like acres of land, but get off their system.
I agree. And again, I 100% agree, although I think it's a medium-term solution at best. I think you can play for time that way. Again, once they implement the total authoritarianism, it's not like the old days where you could be a fugitive from justice in the Wild West and be Jesse James, commit a bunch of murders and be on the run for 40 years, something like that. No one's going to be able to run. No one's going to be able to hide. No one's going to be able to escape. You can have your own thing, but they're going to have ways to control you. And you can have your own, and it's going to help you. Self-sufficiency is never bad. It's always good. Decentralization, getting off the grid, self-sufficiency, always 100% valuable. But you're playing for time, and that's extremely relevant. If you have young kids, you at least want them to have a normal childhood of freedom before. So I agree with that. I just don't think it's a long-term solution to what we're facing now, especially as they're, moving to the next evolution of the vaccine program, which is going to be self-propagating vaccines, airborne vaccines that self-propagate. So it's not going to be a matter of taking the jab anymore. It's going to be a matter of they're going to introduce the vaccine into the wild and it's going to spread, or vaccines in food. So it's going to be genetically engineered food that you buy from the grocery store. You're not going to be permitted, just like in some places you're not permitted to collect rainwater on your own property and drink it and process it for yourself. You're not going to be able to grow your own food. They'll make it illegal. Even you can do it, but they'll make it illegal. And you'll have to drink the food and drink the water and eat the food, which is going to have vaccines in it. It's going to have the vaccines built in genetically and so forth. So
that's why Bill Gates is buying all that land.
Yeah. So again, I pray and hope, but that my kids will grow up and at least make it to adulthood before it gets to the point of this authoritarianism. But I can't, in my professional opinion, hold that opinion because I think we just don't have enough organization. We don't have enough public sentiment, and if we can get drastically farther along that direction, we might have a chance. But we're not there yet.
Is there anything you'd like to say in closing, Noah? This great interview. I think this is super compelling.
Well, I would say, folks need to just kind of take this stuff seriously. This is an operation. We're crime victims. We're being subjected to abuse and exploitation. We're deprivation of our fundamental guaranteed civil liberties and rights that are constitutionally our birthright in this country as citizens have been systematically taken away from us illegally. And we are crime victims. There's been a coup. There's a global and on the national level, the Biden regime was installed. They were not elected. DC's occupied territory, and they're in a cold civil war with the American people right now on behalf of foreign powers that seek to enslave us. That's what's going on. I would say find candidates who will tell you the truth about that and support them, because they're going to face a lot of resistance as folks like I have already. But you need to find and support such candidates. Like Vem was saying, anything you do to buy us time so that we can organize. And don't support people who won't go on TV and publicly tell you the actual truth about what's going on that you know to be true. They're worthless because when they get into power, they're going to be compromised.
Awesome, Noah. I really, really appreciate your time. This was definitely an incredible conversation we just had. And thank you for coming down on the Blood Money podcast.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to be with you, Vem.
Thank you.